In this video, we're going to take a trip to Newfoundland and see whether it still holds on to a version of Irish culture. The connection between Newfoundland and Ireland is more than just a typical diaspora story. It's like a time capsule. While Irish communities in the United States, the UK and Australia quickly blended in, modernized and changed their culture, especially in the Avalon Peninsula and the Cape Shore, basically put that culture on ice. The interesting thing about Newfoundland's preserved culture comes down to three main historical reasons. First off, the migration happened during a specific window, before the famine, around 1750 to 1830. Second, the outports in Newfoundland were super isolated, both geographically and economically, which basically shielded them from outside cultural vibes. And third, and in my opinion, probably the most important, Newfoundland never adopted Ireland's Public Dance Halls Act of 1935. That meant that the traditional house session could keep going strong there, even as it was banned in the Irish Free State. We're going to dive into the evidence, looking at things like old school language patterns and traditional ballads, like the fascinating example of the Unquiet Grave. I'll also be drawing on the work of researchers like Aidan O'Hara and MacEdward Leach, and possibly we might be able to see some signs that the sound of 18th century Ireland is actually still alive and well on Newfoundland's southern shores. The big takeaway here is that this cultural separation isn't because Newfoundland somehow stalled, but because Ireland itself changed, creating that gap. To really get why Newfoundland's culture seemed to just stand still, or have this stasis, if you will, you have to look at how its first settlers arrived. It wasn't like the massive Great Famine migration between 1845 and 52, where a flood of sick Irish people desperately poured into places like Boston, New York, and Liverpool. It wasn't like that at all. The Irish settling in Newfoundland was a slow and steady thing, driven by economics and the seasonal fishing industry. Back in the 18th century, the Irish even called the island Talamh, Éisc, or the land of fish, which tells you everything really. It was basically just a fishing outpost for the Irish maritime economy and a resource for Europe, not a serious standalone colony. The population transfer was highly localized, focusing intensely on a specific geographic corridor. This was not a general Irish migration. Rather, it was a movement of people from the southeast of Ireland usually, almost exclusively to the Avalon Peninsula. Archival evidence shows that the vast majority of immigrants originated within roughly 40 miles of Waterford city, covering parts of counties Waterford, Wexford, Kilkenny and Tipperary. This precise route is historically important because it ensured the virtual transplantation of a unique culture and dialect, a blend of Irish, Gaelic and Yola. This was an archaic English spoken in the Wexford area. Initially, the migration was a seasonal undertaking, with young men travelling from Waterford to work in the summer cod fishery. They were often recruited by English by-boat keepers or merchants in the West Country who stopped in Waterford for both supplies and labour. Although the pay was poor and the conditions were harsh as well, the lack of economic opportunity in rural Ireland made permanent settlement in the Avalon Peninsula an attractive, or perhaps even a necessary, option for those looking to improve their prospects. By the late 1770s, the number of Irish migrating annually to the colony had reached approximately 5,000. This trend accelerated in the 1780s as a growing number of migrants chose to remain through the winter, thus transitioning from temporary seasonal workers to permanent settlers. By 1836, a census revealed that the Irish and their offspring composed half of the total population of Newfoundland, with nearly 75% concentrated at or in and around the St. John's and the Avalon Peninsula. This demographic dominance created like a critical mass that is essential for cultural preservation. Unlike the Irish in London or New York, who were minorities forced to integrate into a dominant Anglo-Protestant industrial culture, the Irish often found themselves in communities that were 100% Irish Catholic. Folks living in isolated spots like the Cape Shore and the Southern Shore really held on to their roots, making them tough to absorb into the wider Canadian culture. They basically kept the 18th century customs and identity of their Waterford origins alive. It was like an Irish community on a long-term overseas trip. The big wave of Irish immigration to Newfoundland hit its high point during the first 30 years of the 19th century, with an estimated 30,000 to 35,000 people arriving. The key thing is that this inflow pretty much stopped dead because no new people came in later. The local culture and dialect never really got mixed up with or refreshed by what was happening in Ireland after the famine. So the community was basically put in a cultural time capsule, leading to a founder effect where the way they spoke and the music that they played were permanently set by those first settlers.
Winter is once October comes, dead on then. And we'll be playing cards in the nights, and there'll be all kinds of games. We'll be playing poker, and they'll be playing, they used to play action, they used to play 45s, and most of their own alcoholic beverages it was made by themselves at home.
The truck system was an interesting one. This was like a cashless credit arrangement in the Newfoundland fishery. This unintentionally acted as a mechanism for cultural preservation. Under this system, merchants provided supplies to fishermen in exchange for their future catch, leading to like a cycle of perpetual debt and dependence that anchored families to their specific outports. This economic structure created a profound cultural condition, immobility. For generations, families were confined to the same small coves, working, living and dying there. Limited funds for travel and the absence of connecting roads until the mid-20th century, save for the sea, which was governed by the fishery, maintained this isolation. This isolation became the perfect environment for preserving pre-famine culture. The outport itself effectively became a hermetically sealed vessel for the culture imported in the 1790s, where oral traditions, songs, stories and distinct dialects flourished as the sole form of history and entertainment in the absence of external media, modern transportation networks, or new population influxes. Prior to Newfoundland's confederation with Canada in 1949, this lack of modernisation meant that early 20th century Newfoundland shared a striking structural parallel with early 19th century Ireland. Both were deeply religious, agrarian, maritime societies that relied on oral transmission of information and were structured around the extended family and the parish. However, while Ireland rapidly modernised after its independence in the 1920s, rural Newfoundland remained culturally and structurally suspended in the age of sail and steam until the government's resettlement programs began in the 1950s and 60s. But do you want to know the clearest sign of the Newfoundland-Ireland connection? Just listen to the accent.
Look, you were saying that your grandmother came from Ireland?
Yes.
And what was her name?
Nancy Devereux.
Do you know where she came from in Ireland?
No, Tipperary in Cork.
Tipperary and Cork. Yeah. Did they ever mention any other places in Ireland where they came from?
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay.
I used to be telling them about it, stories about, places.
What, did they be singing songs?
Oh, my God, I found them out.
Experts who've studied the language agree the way people talk on the southern and Cape shores isn't just similar to Irish accents. It's practically the time capsule that we've been talking about. It's a straight-up continuation of the dialects spoken in Southeast Ireland back in the late 18th century. That's why linguists like Professor Sandra Clark call Newfoundland English a relic variety. It holds on to the features that have disappeared in Ireland due to modernisation. People from Waterford visiting St. John's or the southern shore often say that it feels like that they've gone back in time, hearing pronunciations that even the Irish don't use much anymore. Another huge giveaway is the characteristic sing-song rhythm and rising pitch of the speech. This is thanks to the influence of Irish language. Even though Irish or Gaeilge faded out after being widely spoken in some Newfoundland homes in the 19th and early 20th century, it left a lasting mark on how people structure sentences and the overall rhythm of their English. This is called Hiberno-English, and it's basically the transfer of Gaelic grammar rules into English. A classic example of this is the after perfect construction, as in, I'm after doing that, which just means I have just done that. It's a direct translation from the Irish phrase, Táimid tar éis. There are an awful lot more examples of this, and I remember seeing a video somewhere, so later on while I'm editing this, I'm going to try and find it, and I'll put it down in the description, because it was a very fun and eye-opening video really, so I think you'll enjoy it. Why does Newfoundland seem older than Ireland? The answer lies in the contrasting 20th century histories of the two places. Ireland underwent a series of traumatic and transformative events that fundamentally altered the social fabric: the famine, the land wars, the War of Independence, the civil wars, and the subsequent domination of the Catholic Church in the Free State's legislative affairs. Newfoundland, on the other hand, experienced a form of stasis. While it did have its own economic hardships, it didn't really suffer a culture-shattering event equivalent to the famine, nor did it experience the same aggressive modernization of social laws in the early 20th century. The timeline of Newfoundland's cultural evolution effectively paused in 1830 and resumed only with Confederation in 1949. Perhaps the most significant, yet overlooked, factor in the divergence of musical culture is the Public Dance Halls Act of 1935 in Ireland. This piece of legislation, lobbied by the Catholic hierarchy and passed by the Dáil, required anyone holding a dance to obtain a licence. Its stated aim was to curb immoral behaviour, but its practical effect was the criminalisation of the traditional house dance or crossroads dance. Prior to 1935, Irish social life revolved around neighbours gathering in a private kitchen to play fiddles, sing ballads, and dance. This was an organic, non-commercial community-led activity. The 1935 Act forced social dancing out of the home and into the parochial hall under the supervision of the parish priest. This shift killed the intimate, unamplified music of the kitchen and gave rise to the céilí bands, larger, louder ensembles required to fill a hall, but the nuance of the solo fiddle or the unaccompanied ballad was lost in the noise of these dance halls. Newfoundland never passed such an act. The Catholic Church in Newfoundland, while it was powerful, did not enforce a legislative ban on house dances. Consequently, the social structure of the 18th century remained the social structure of the 1960s. The tradition of the kitchen racket, the scuff or time, persisted in Newfoundland throughout the entire 20th century, completely uninterrupted. Accounts describe the scuff as a spontaneous house gathering where people would dance on the hard floor, often scuffing the wood, and sing without musical accompaniment. Crucially, because outports were not subjected to the moral regulations seen in places like Free State Ireland, the time became the central mechanism for cultural transmission. It was the setting where ballads were performed and the complex steps of older dances were maintained. A time is a colloquial term for an organised event, usually involving music, often set dancing or square dancing, and some food as well. By the 1950s in Ireland, traditional music faced marginalisation or was formalised into competitions like the Fleadh Cheoil in an effort to save it. In 1950s Newfoundland, traditional music was simply a part of everyday life, what people did on a regular evening. Since the tradition had never been halted by legislation or the pressures of becoming more modern, no revival was necessary. The Newfoundland time is thus considered the direct survival of the pre-1935 Irish house dance, preserved by its geographic isolation across the Atlantic. The repertoire of songs in Newfoundland is the most concrete evidence of its pre-famine Irish and English cultural survival. Thanks to the isolated nature of the outports, folklore collectors like MacEdward Leach and Kenneth Peacock found that ballads which had vanished from the oral traditions of Ireland and England for centuries were still actively being sung. Essentially, the popular songs of the 1790s remained the popular songs of the 1950s. A prime example of this is the ballad The Unquiet Grave.
A few small drops of rain
This song, which features a medieval European concept of the supernatural, a ghost speaking to a lover who has mourned for over a year, was nearly extinct in Ireland by the 20th century and very rare in England. However, Newfoundland yielded 21 recordings, making it the most popular of all the Child pieces. Child here refers to Francis James Child. He was an American scholar and Harvard professor who compiled the definitive academic collection of traditional folk songs titled The English and Scottish Popular Ballads. The persistence of the Unquiet Grave in Newfoundland suggests the enduring power of a supernatural worldview, and this contrasts with Ireland, where the strict devotional revolution of 19th century Catholicism, led by Cardinal Paul Cullen, likely contributed to the erosion of such beliefs. The precarious existence in Newfoundland's outports, particularly the constant threat of death at sea, fostered the necessary emotional and psychological environment for this ballad to survive. Because of this, the song functioned as more than mere entertainment. It was a critical mechanism for the community to process profound grief, serving as a powerful marker of pre-modern psychological landscape. One of Newfoundland's most famous songs, She's Like the Swallow, is a perfect example of how complex this kind of preservation can be.
She's like the swallow that flies so high.
Maud Carpella's first collected it in 1930 from John Hunt in Placentia Bay. And get this as well, it was practically unknown anywhere else. While some academics lean towards English roots, the tune's modal feel and the structure of the lyrics really echo the Irish sean-nós tradition. In fact, contemporary musicians think that it probably came from Ireland or Scotland. And this is just a quick important thing to note here about these songs. It's very hard to trace the exact roots of these songs back to whether it was Irish, Scottish, English, or whatever it might be. The fact remains that the people around this area were all so close together that it really muddies where it actually came from. You really do see this with the majority of folk songs. But the weird thing here is that it was obscure in Europe, but it became a massive hit in Newfoundland after Peacock published it in the 1960s. This might suggest that Newfoundland basically acted as a hiding spot for a song that was likely lost everywhere else. It's like a ghost song. This beautiful piece of music that survived simply because someone carried it across the ocean and tucked it away in a kitchen in Placentia Bay. The song's themes, the swallow, the river, the heartbreak, are totally timeless. But the reason it's still around is totally unique to the culture of the Newfoundland outport. The American folklorist MacEdward Leach conducted pivotal fieldwork between 1949 and 1951. His timing was impeccable. He arrived just as Newfoundland was joining Canada, capturing the oral tradition at the very precipice of modernization. Leach recorded over 700 songs. His collection Songs from the Outports documents a society where singing was not performance, but communication. Leach noted that the songs were the news of the day, as much as they were entertainment. His works serves as the audio validation of the time capsule theory, capturing voices that sound undeniably Irish, yet uniquely archaic. Leach's recordings offer an invaluable window on the culture before the resettlement programs of the mid-century disrupted the outport structures. In the 1970s, Irish broadcaster Aidan O'Hara arrived in Newfoundland and was struck by the cultural shock of recognition. He became known as the real Irishman on the Cape Shore, but he later found that the locals were actually more Irish than he was. O'Hara's work is crucial because it provides the comparative perspective. As a native Irishman, specifically he was from Donegal, he could identify the specific regionalisms like Waterford and Wexford that the locals had taken for granted. He noted that the accent of 200 years ago was alive and well in the outports. His documentaries for RTE brought this reality back to Ireland, revealing to the Irish public that their own lost heritage was waiting for them across the Atlantic. O'Hara recorded over 400 songs and dance rhymes, effectively repatriating the lost folklore of the Southeast. A critical distinction must be made between Irish Newfoundland culture and Irish American culture. In the United States, Irish culture was often performative, political, and nostalgic. It became associated with St. Patrick's Day parades, green beer, and a generalised Celtic identity formed in opposition to WASP society. The WASP here, WASP, refers to the social group of wealthy white Protestants largely of British descent, who held like a near monopoly on political, financial, and social power in the 19th and early 20th century United States. In contrast, Newfoundland's Irishness was organic in a way. A fisherman on the southern shore didn't sing the Unquiet Grave to prove that he was Irish, let's say. He sang it because his grandfather sang it. There was no political need to assert identity because there was no opposing group in the immediate vicinity. Unlike the Irish in Boston facing the "No Irish Need Apply" signs, the Newfoundland Irish were not a minority fighting for recognition. They were the majority living their lives. The cultural stasis that preserved this heritage was threatened in the post-Confederation era by the government's resettlement program from 1954 to 1975. This controversial policy incentivized families to move away from these isolated outports, which were expensive to service. They wanted them to move to larger growth centres. This centralisation eroded the isolation that had protected the pre-famine culture. Communities were broken up, and the intimate social structure of the time was replaced by the modern amenities of the town. However, this threat also sparked a cultural reaction. A cultural renaissance was happening in the 1970s, led by figures like Aidan O'Hara and bands like Ryan's Fancy. They sought to document and celebrate the unique heritage before it was lost. The band, Ryan's Fancy, comprised of Irish immigrants Fergus O'Byrne, Dennis Ryan and Dermot O'Reilly, played a pivotal role here. They travelled to the outports to film and record the old singers for television. Ironically, it took modern Irishmen to validate the archaic Irish culture of the Newfoundlanders. They recognised that the version of the West's Awake or the Star of Logie Bay had a purity that was rare in the commercialised folk scene of Europe. The album, An Irish Night at the Black Knight Lounge, serves as evidence of the fusion of two traditions, the modern Irish revival and its ancient predecessor in St. John's. The preservation of pre-famine Irish music in Newfoundland is not an accident of history, but a result of a few things. Migration. The Waterford-Avalon link established a homogenous culture before the language shift in Ireland was complete. Isolation. The truck system and the geography of the outport prevented the dilution of this culture by the mainland North American mainstream. And divergence. The absence of the Public Dance Halls Act allowed the 18th century social structure, the house visit, to survive the 20th century. Newfoundland, or Talamh on Éisc, offers a unique what-if scenario for Irish history. It acts as a control group in a way, showing how Irish culture might have developed without the profound impact of the famine or the strong centralised control of the mid-century Catholic Church and state. I know that within Ireland, thinking of what things would have been like if these events hadn't have occurred, you are getting into an alternate history type of thing. We truly do not know for sure what would have happened. We can only imagine it. I do think it is a rather beautiful image that the diaspora had preserved the music and culture in some way. Although you have to consider the music that we have today. I could list loads of songs or tunes even, but let's pick one big one. The Fields of Athenry. That never would have been written if the famine had never happened, right? What would people be singing at football matches? Tell me what you think down in the comments about that one. It is a fun one to consider, but have a think about it. If we sit here and imagine what things would be like if XYZ things were different, though I gotta tell you, I am thankful for what we have today, and it can only give you more respect for the music and the history and the people who suffered in some way or even survived. Thanks so much for watching. Before you go, if you made it this far, please hit that like button. You'd be helping me out a lot. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This whole era of emigration spans centuries, really. If you haven't seen my other video on the music within Ireland throughout the famine years, you can check it out here. It does give different perspective on things, and it doesn't really focus on the usual statistics and numbers, mainly the music and culture. If you've time to have a browse, have a look at the shop there as well, where I have some Irish music themed bits and pieces. I'm in the middle of designing a few more as well for St. Patrick's Day and stuff like that, so keep your eyes peeled. It's only 2 months left. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to our channel members. Thanks so much for all your support. I just want to let you know I'm working on something that I can give back to all of you over the next few weeks. Just to thank you for all the support over the last year. I'm thinking something along the lines of something to help you learn tunes or something like that. It's still in the early stages. But once I put it all together, I'll let you know. Also, a very warm welcome to our newest members, Lewis Krupp, Ronico and Paul O'Farrell. Thanks so much for joining. I'm really glad to have you all here. If you'd like to join them, you can hit that join button down below to learn more or check out the links in the description for more information. But hey, look, that's it from me. Thanks a million for watching. Really hope you enjoyed it. Hope you all have a great day as well. Slán go fóill. Cheers.